Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, Book Talks with Yo. My name is Yoanna and today we are talking about writing historical fiction. If you've watched my research plan video, you probably know that I am planning on writing a historical fiction that is set in Elizabethan England at the end of 16th century, beginning of 17th century. And right now I am in the middle of my extensive, and I mean extensive research about the time period and some other specifics connected to my story that I'm going to talk about in another video. But I've been also researching how to write historical fiction novels because it's something new for me. And at the beginning it sounded really intimidating and really scary, but I found some really interesting tips and I decided that I want to share them with you. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into the video and talk about historical fiction. Okay, first up is something rather obvious, but I still feel the need to mention it just in case. And this is to do a lot of research. And I mean a lot, like really a lot. Read about everything connected with your historical person or time or period, or if you're talking about a particular historical event, just read a lot about the thing you're going to write about, as the more you research, the more you read about these things, the more confident you would feel in your writing, and that would definitely show in your story. If you are not sure in your knowledge about the time period, this will definitely, your readers will be able to see this in your writing, and this is not what we want. So just read a lot, read about all the details that you can find on the internet about the time period that you've chosen or the person. And another important thing is to find a good balance between primary and secondary resources, because apart from knowing all the historical dates and like exact times or stuff like this, you also want to get the small details like the way they dressed, the way they ate, what food do they eat, how do their houses look or something like this. You need to have all the details in order to be able to create them in an authentic manner. You need to have read a lot about this, and just take a lot of notes while you're reading. And don't worry, even if you don't use all of those notes at the beginning, you never know when something might come in handy. You can add some little details at some point. You will need all the information you're going to find while you're researching. And another important thing that I found out during my own research is to always cross-reference your sources. Be sure that the information that you're getting is the right one, as you don't want to get wrong or misleading information, because it's gonna make your research process a lot more messy, and then you have plot holes and your story will look like if you haven't done the research, although you have done research. But if you have misleading information, your readers will just think that you were not well informed on the time period. The next advice is to choose right from the start how much will be historical truth and how much will be fiction. And what I mean by this is that basically you as the author have the complete freedom, creative freedom, to choose the structure of a novel, and in that way you're also choosing how much will be your imagination and how much will be historical facts and truths. And you can do a couple of different things with historical novels. You can either choose a real story that happened in history and talk about those real events and real people, but yeah, the dialogue and some little details will be your own invention, so it will be fiction, but there will be a lot more factual stuff than fiction in this case. Or you can also take a real event but use your creative freedom to just bend things a little bit, change things, add stuff, but be very careful with this one. But you can also do this. Or you can do, another a very good example of a book like this is the Stalking Jack the Ripper series, which I adore, by the way, right at this moment. But it takes a real event and very much is based on... It takes most of the events of that time, but it fills them with fiction and creates new details or removes other details that just don't work for the story. Or you can do a completely different thing. You can choose completely fictional people, completely fictional events, and just use a real historical period or real event as the background of your story. And an example I can think of right now is the Duchess deal and all the Regency romance novels, because they're set at a certain time in history and they use the social environment of that time, but the people are completely fictional, and this gives you a lot more freedom to explore just explore your creativity in this case, as there doesn't have to be that much historical truth to this. But yeah, it's very important to establish this right from the beginning and know for yourself what you're doing, so you know how much of your research will be implemented in your book, and you can structure everything else around this single fact that you have about your story. A very big part of historical fiction novels, and honestly all novels whatsoever, is writing dialogue. And that was a particular concern of mine. Like, when I first started thinking about my story, I was really excited, but then at what point I was like, am I meant to write dialogue in the way people spoke in the 17th century? And then my exact next concern was, do I have to write? I have to write dialogue for Shakespeare, right? Because he is a character in my story. How do I do that? How does one write dialogue for Shakespeare himself? But then I did some research on writing dialogue in historical fiction solely, and all my concerns were laid to rest, more or less. And the thing is that, of course, different time periods and different eras have their own vocabulary and had their own grammar structures, which is obvious. But the thing is that you do not have to turn this into your main way of writing dialogue. It is nice to include some certain phrases or words in order to reinforce the historical feeling, the historical setting of your plot, of your story, and just overall the feel of that time. But you do not need to include too many of those, because otherwise it will turn into a very difficult to read dialogue and even frustrating, and that is not going to be a pleasant reading experience, which is not what we want. We don't want our readers to be struggling over words from the 14th century, for example, trying to read dialogue as if they were in the Canterbury Tales or something like this. You don't need to focus too much on that. Of course, you also shouldn't include some phrases or structures that we use nowadays, because people wouldn't have known them at that time, and you should just familiarize yourself with the etiquette of speaking at that time and the way people addressed each other, because of course it will be very different than what we do now. The next tip is to craft your characters according to the time period and era that you're setting your story in. And what I mean here is that it is important to know the social conventions and the environment of the time period that you're writing in, and to create characters that fit into those social conventions and in that time, and just sound authentic for those times, as you don't want your characters to feel out of place, as this will just spoil the reading experience and take the person out, like the reader, out of this setting and of this time, and just this overall feel that you're trying to create with your story. But you also don't want to create characters who are too obedient to their social conventions. You want to create characters who break the social conventions, who are challenging them, who are ready to challenge the prejudice of their era, because this will essentially make for fun, engaging, intriguing, and multi-layered characters that we root for and that we want to learn more about. But just be very careful not to overdo this, because we don't want our characters sounding like they don't have anything to do with their era. You have to find the right balance between the two and create characters who are both rebellious in some ways, but both have the way of thinking of their era. And it's also nice to have both types of characters, ones who are very compliant to their social conventions and to the etiquette of that time, and others who just don't feel like they can fit in those. Which leads me to my next advice, which is to be very careful to not include your 21st century way of thinking or manners or ways of viewing the world into your story and into your characters. I know that it is very easy to subconsciously do this when you're writing your characters, but you should be really careful not to do that, because chances are your character is not going to be thinking the same way that you are nowadays. This is normal, because this is said back in the days, even if it's just 50 years before our time, it is still going to be different than the way a modern person sees the world. Our characters certainly don't see the world the way we see it, because their time, their social conventions are going to shape their view on the world, their feelings about different things, and they're going to just be very, very different than the way we see things, the way we view things, the way we feel about things. And it can be even simple things like romantic love or self-identity or one's place in society or your manners or what is socially acceptable and what is not. Because you cannot have someone in, for example, the 16th century going around talking about their mental health, for example, in the way we do. You can still have them being modern thinking for their time, as I previously said, but you should be really careful with this because you don't want them to sound out of place and just unnatural there. But it can all be avoided if you've done all your extensive research and you know more about the way people spoke, the way people thought at that period, and just what was socially okay and what was not. Next very important thing is to not cram information. You have to know how to seamlessly insert the history that you've researched into your story. And I know that after you've done all this extensive research and you have all those notes in your notebook or in your laptop, it is very, very tempting to just include everything in your story and show your reader that you've done your work, but you have to resist this temptation. I feel like I would be tempted as well, but we have to resist this temptation. We have to be strong about this, as otherwise it would just spoil the whole thing and it would ruin our research and essentially our story, which obviously is not what we want after all the work we've put so far. But the thing is that yes, you have all those little details from the way they dress to the way the butcher shop looked like or something like this. But chances are you're probably not going to use all of this, and that's completely okay, but you still need to know this, as there are some ways in which you can insert small details, but there has to be a balance. And you have to come to terms with the fact that yes, you're not going to be using everything that you've read. But still, everything that you've read will have a point, as this will show in your writing, as I previously said. This is probably one of the best advice when I found when I was doing my research, and this is to establish your own rules about when you can bend history and how you can do this and when you have to stick to the truth. So essentially, as we previously said, it's very important to establish right from the beginning how much from your story will be fiction and how much will be historical, factual truth. And you as a writer have the complete freedom to choose whatever you want. You have to choose the ratio between fiction and facts in your story, but after you have done this, you also need to establish certain rules for yourself about when you can change or alter or remove some historical facts in order to make your story more interesting. As essentially, you're not writing an encyclopedia, you're not writing a textbook, you're writing a book. And the idea of your novel is to entertain people and to make them feel interested and to hook them, to grip them. And you're not going to grip them if you're giving them a history lesson. So establish your own rules, know when you can bend things, know when you can change things. And remember that you don't always have to bend historical truths in order to write a historical fiction. There are so many gaps and mysteries and unsolved cases and unanswered questions in history that you have the complete freedom to fill those gaps with your own fiction, and that is completely okay. The only thing that you have to remember is that your story still needs to be plausible. So the thing that you're writing still have to sound realistic, and those have to be things that could have actually happened at that time of history. And another very obvious advice to end things on is to read other historical fiction set at that time or concerning that person or that event in history that you're going to write about. And this doesn't mean copy other writers, definitely don't do that, but that means that you can get inspired by other people, you can see how other people before you did that and see what you can do differently or what you like from this, what worked for them and what can work for you. So yeah, that pretty much wraps up today's video. I really hope you enjoyed watching, and if you did, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on my new videos. Please let me know down in the comments if you've ever written something in the historical fiction genre and what is your favorite thing about this genre. Thank you again for watching, and I really hope to see you all next time. Until then, have a smiley week. Bye!